Hey internet, morning, it's me Myles. Shouldn't talk my mouth full, sorry, it's very rude. And this video is going to be about male circumcision. Still eating. Now, for those of you who don't know, male circumcision is the medical procedure of removing the foreskin from the end of the penis. Now, it's gained a lot of popularity over the past 150 years, particularly in places like America. But for something that's gained so much popularity, very few people know anything about it. They don't know the history behind it, and they don't know the medical advantages and disadvantages of having it. So in this video, hopefully, I will answer some of those questions. So, let's dive in, shall we? The first evidence of circumcision dates back to the times of the ancient Egyptians. Carvings on tomb thought to date between 2400 and 2300 BC clearly show the procedure being performed. Although no historian disagrees with what has been depicted here, many of them disagree about why Egyptians would do this. Some of it think it was a rite of passage into adulthood, while others think it was more of a distinction between the elite and the rest of the population. Circumcision was later featured in the Hebrew Bible, which describes the circumcision of Abraham and his relatives, and his slaves, not as a spiritual act, but as a physical sign of their covenant with God. Now, about 150 years ago, as I said, circumcision wasn't as popular as it is nowadays in America. It was seen more as a religious act, and it wasn't really seen as a medical procedure unless it was trying to alleviate a specific medical problem. This was until Dr. Louis Sayre, one of the most prominent physicians in America at the time, came up with some very strange theories indeed. In 1870, he was asked to look at a young boy who was suffering from paralysis, or some kind of motor neuron problem. And he thought the reason why this boy was suffering because the head of his penis was too tight. Yeah, so he circumcised the boy, and coincidentally this boy actually became better. Now we know that it's not linked together whatsoever, but he thought it was. And not only that, he thought that, you know what, this act of circumcision can cure a whole host of other things, including syphilis, headaches, alcoholism, masturbation and lunacy. Believe it or not, his interesting theories actually caught on with the medical community, who then began to see circumcision as a miracle or cure for all kinds of things. One of the things that was looked into was a cure, as I said before, for giving yourself a low five. Yeah, apparently we need a cure for that. And there was a specific doctor who actually looked into it, and he was called John Kellogg, who you've probably recognised his name somewhere. Yeah, there was a reason why I had this at the beginning of the video. He worked for the, and I kid you not, this is the actual name, rehabilitation of masturbators, and often employed extreme measures in his research. This would include the forced circumcision of boys and young men caught having a wank. He also would do it without anaesthetic, and he writes about this in his book, Plain Facts for Young and Old. The operation should be performed by a surgeon without administrating an anaesthetic, as the brief pain attending the operation will have a salutary effect upon the mind, especially if it's connected with the idea of punishment, as it may well be in some cases. He also burnt the clitorises of young women with phenol who were seen to be practicing abnormal excitement. Yeah. Now the views of the medical community began to change, and they saw circumcision no longer as a miracle cure, but as a preventative measure. And so it was kind of suggested to the public that they take their young boys in to have this procedure performed on them. Now this was going on in North America and in Europe, but in Europe there was a mounting body of evidence that said, you know what, this is utter bollocks. There's no medical reason for doing this, so we're not going to promote it anymore. But in America, they continued to keep doing it, and they keep doing it to this day. Although claims of circumcision preventing things like syphilis and alcoholism and headaches have completely disappeared, recently there's been a resurgence in the medical benefits that apparently circumcision can have. And one of them that's going around at the moment is that it can prevent transmission of HIV. I honestly just can't seem to get away from HIV. I probably should have phrased that a little bit better. Yeah, so the idea is that if you're circumcised, you will be less likely to catch the virus. Now, one thing that's missed by a lot of people who are promoting this research is that that's only one way. That's female to male transmission that's already quite low. They're not talking about male to female, which is relatively quite high, and something I think that is definitely missed by these people. One such study that I found that heterosexual men who were circumcised in sub-Saharan Africa had a decreased risk of infection between about 38 and 66% over 2 years. Now that sounds really promising off the bat, but when you actually look at the research, you see a massive problem with it. You see, when I originally read the abstract, I thought it would be a study looking at two groups of men in sub-Saharan Africa. One group would be circumcised and one group wouldn't be. But that's not the case. What they did was they found a massive group of people and then they circumcised half of them and then let them go off for 2 years and then see who became HIV positive. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you have part of your penis cut off, you are probably not going to want to have sex anytime in the near future. So already that's going to skew the results towards the people who are circumcised. So that's a massive flaw in the paper that's never really addressed. Now, I'm not saying there isn't better papers out there, because there is. There are a lot of papers out there that say, you know what, being circumcised will reduce your risk of infection, and they're peer-reviewed and they're in good journals. But equally, there's a lot of papers out there that says there is no link whatsoever. We can't find one. So how do you take this? How do you look at this? Well, you look at it for what it is. It's an interesting tidbit, nothing else. This isn't going to protect you against HIV. The only thing that's going to protect you against HIV is to wear a condom. You cannot rely on slightly decreased risk factors whatsoever. For example, I'm European, so I have a 1 in 10 chance of being resistant to certain strains of HIV, and I have a 1 in 100 chance of practically being immune to them. But I wouldn't rely on these greater numbers to protect me against HIV whatsoever, and these people shouldn't rely on some not quite sure science to protect them against HIV. The only protection there is out there is a condom, or obviously not to have sex with someone who's HIV positive. Even though this study that I originally found was flawed, it did say something really quite interesting. And that was, out of the 2,328 circumcisions they performed, 178, that's 7.6%, of men reported adverse effects. These included things like erectile dysfunction, swelling, excessive bleeding, infections, damage to the penis, and problems with appearance, etc., etc. Proponents of circumcision say there are other medical benefits, including reducing your risk of having urinary tract infections. Right, first of all, there is no evidence whatsoever that supports this whatsoever. Second, it's a little overboard, don't you think? If you get one of these infections, what do? You take some antibiotics and then you're fine and dandy. I mean, for goodness sake, you wouldn't remove the eye out of fear of getting pink eye. So why would it be okay to remove the foreskin out of fear of getting urinary tract infections? It's the same as saying women have a higher risk of getting breast cancer, so let's remove breasts from all women. But there's probably a few of you out there thinking right now, whoa, breasts have other functions, the foreskin doesn't. Well, you're not correct there. Among other things, the foreskin enhances sexual pleasure and protects the gland. There are somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 nerve endings compacted into the human foreskin, which are used in the ejaculation reflex. Medics and scientists know exactly where these nerve endings are, and they know exactly what they do. So it stands to reason that if you no longer have them because they've been cut off, then you will have decreased sexual pleasure. Another way being circumcised can decrease your sexual pleasure is that the head of the penis will no longer be protected and kept moist, so it will actually become hard, and that will decrease your pleasure as well. Let's also not forget that physically, circumcision can leave a scar, as well as making the penis smaller and a funny shape. Now, a lot of people say that they want to get their son circumcised because it's more hygienic, and when they say this, they're referring to the build-up of oily gunk and dead skin that can accumulate underneath the foreskin. Now, what these people often don't know is something very similar happens with women. So why is it not a problem for women and it's a problem for men? The answer is it's not. Both of them can just be washed away. So to sum it up, there are no medical or scientific reasons to get your son or yourself circumcised unless you have a very specific genital problem. Even the most optimistic benefit effects are easily outdone by the negative effects. And let's not also forget that circumcision is a medical procedure, and like all medical procedures, it poses a risk. On average, I think in America, 1 out of every 100 children who are circumcised will have a complication. Now, usually those complications are nothing too bad, but every now and again there'll be one that's really horrific. In fact, children have died as a result of being circumcised. Now, there might be some of you out there thinking, hey, you know what, I'm circumcised and I have absolutely no problem with it. And that's absolutely fine, that's absolutely hunky-dory. But don't you think that decision to be circumcised should have been yours? And for the vast majority of men and boys in America, it's not. It just happens to them. I mean, can you imagine if you got to make that decision when, say, you're an age where you can make that decision, say 17, 16? How many of you do you think would actually opt in to being circumcised? I think the numbers would be quite small, unless you had a specific medical problem. But let's stand out a second from this video. Let's completely stand back and pretend we live in a world where circumcision, male circumcision, doesn't happen. What do you think we would do to a person seen performing it? A procedure that has no medical benefits, a procedure that is completely outdated, a procedure that is going to decrease the sexual pleasure of the child when it grows up. What do you think we would do to that person? We'd send them to prison. Horrible things would happen to them. But it's seen as perfectly fine, especially in North America. Whereas things like female circumcision, which I realise can be far worse, is seen as a horrific act. In the UK, it carries a sentence of 14 years if you're found to have done it. And yet, for some reason, male circumcision is completely hunky-dory, which is something I personally never really understood. So anyway, this is the end of this video. Hopefully, it was informative, and I would love to know what you think, if you think I'm wrong, or if you think I've missed anything out. So let me know down below and all that kind of jazz, and I will see you guys and guyettes when I see you next. Goodbye, internet people.